the field of dealing with where one needs a mezuzah is detailed. There are svarim written just on this alone, and needless to say, like Kol HaTorah Kula, there are numerous disagreements. There are numerous minhagim. There are halachas of doing it in the Beis HaMedrash, Beis HaKnesses. The Pashtus is a Beis HaKnesses does not need a mezuzah, but if the building has other rooms in which you eat, a kiddush room, a chazan HaKnesses used to live on site and have his residence there, so you'd have your mezuzahs coming out of the Beis HaKnesses to the other area, which is a minig of Chabad, maybe others. Rachayimpur and the shuls nearby, mezuzah in the Beis HaKnesses. Beis HaMidrash, where you're supposed to do v'hagisa v'yayimon v'layla, and me'ikar hadin, you're allowed to eat there, you're allowed to put your head down and sleep there, because you're there all the time. It's a little bit of kain taduru. So Mamela, it's a mokum dira mamish, and over there I believe everyone holds you should do it on the way in. What is the fine line between a Beis HaKnesses and a Beis HaMedrash? It gets a little blurry, but it's basically usage. The title here was Maintaining and Purchasing. Now, logic has it that you purchase before you maintain. But maybe that title was because a person doesn't purchase it, he gets it Yerusha from the Zaydah. That is a problem. There's an emotional connection to the Zaydas, Amol Elter Zaydas. This pair of tefillin is from Ukraine, from, before the wars. I don't think there's such a thing as before the wars in Ukraine. But that's what they tell me. They're 100, 150 years old. Anything that was written in Russia, unless it was very recently, was before the 1917 revolution. Any of us remember Tsar Nikolai, any of you? The Romanovs? Yeah. So it's very nice to keep it going. It's an emotional feeling. But as holy as tefillin are, they are finite. They're physical. There's oxidation, a chemical change in the ink where it gets lighter and lighter. There's often cracking because in the shel rosh, the head component of tefillin, there are 4 narrow slots, as dictated by the Torah. The Torah doesn't spell it out clearly. As dictated by the Torah, as interpreted by our rabbis, 4 narrow slots. The only way you're going to get that piece of parchment in there to sit properly is by folding it flat. Folding a parchment flat, wherever the letters are, it's a lot of stress on the ink. So there's cracking. There's flaking sometimes, which is it's more of a problem with Sifrei Torah. But so it's a very warm feeling. It's a very good feeling, but they wear out. There's a time you just have to give up.
It doesn't checked ever, like Mezuzos and halacha.
It's coming.
Okay.
It's coming.
So the bottom also disintegrate like that?
Louder, please.
The bottom also disintegrates, or only the parchment?
Bottom don't usually disintegrate, but we're going to get to the halachic requirements for kosher bottom, and you will see that with aging or misuse, not drying your hair after you go to the mikveh, and things like that. You go to the mikveh before davening, Rabbeinu Yonah says your tefillas are more niskabel, and so on. If you don't dry your hair well, my problem is solved. And then on Shabbos, where you're not supposed to press your hair dry, you don't have to wear tefillin. So, it works out. There are contingencies. So, it's a very wonderful thing if it can be done. But often, maybe very often, the situation, the reality of the case is they're too far gone. They're just too far gone. I just mentioned there is an extremely detailed field of where the mezuzah must be placed, where you need it, where you don't need it. And today, life has become a little easier with people with diagrams, bird's eye view of this and that. They leave out details. They're not an expert in knowing what's required. Today, you take your cell phone, you take a photograph of the doorway that's under question. It's better from both sides. And then you bring it to your maven. You also have to have input, the nature, the use of the room and the adjoining room, and a posek who knows this field will be able to answer you. Maintaining mezuzahs. If you put a mezuzah parchment, the word mezuzah, in my terminology, the way I'm using it, literally, let's start from the beginning. Literally, the word mezuzah, as we find it in the Torah, means a doorpost. Mashkof, a lintel. Rashi says the word lintel right there, right? So you don't know English as well as Rashi does, although he did it in French. It's the same word. That, in turn, has been a Lashon Mushal, borrowed and adapted to the word mezuzah, the parchment. People have gone further, and now you have a nice mezuzah with the thingy that goes inside. So today, it's already been for the casing. For clarity in my lecture, mezuzah means the parchment, and casing means the casing. A casing which is shallow turns you into a situation unnecessarily like what has to be done with the scripts in the shel rosh, in the head tefillin. I mention this because in the arm tefillin, one compartment only, it's rolled kind of loosely, like so there shouldn't be much stress on it. Now someone's going to question, this is a shel yad? We'll get to it. On the outside it looks like something else. The shallow cases require folding, hence we have an issue with unnecessary cracking. Even with a normal, healthy compartment in the mezuzah casing, the innermost part of how it's rolled is rolled the tightest. Hence, there's more stress there. There are parchments which have been treated naturally. There is a halachic process in how to turn skins into leather. Point number one, it has to come from a kosher species of animal. It need not be kosher. It could have died. It could have been a nevela, a treifa, not a proper shechita. Could have been attacked by a marauder, but there's still a hide there. You may use it. But to take a raw hide and turn it into leather has to be done for the sanctity of Torah, Tefilin, Mezuzos, Megillas Esther, etc., etc. When that's done, it's a whole field unto itself also. And there are some issues with it, but halachically too. But once it's done properly and cut down to size and lines scored into it, mezuzah and la halacha, Sefer Torah, must have these lines. It's not just there for convenience so you can write straight lines.
How do they make
it's
it?
called sirtut. It's impressed in, it's embossed. You don't make a thin colored line. It's embossed. Without it, it's not kosher. For tefillin, you do need something called sirgul. Sirgol is a forerunner for the word circle. And you need the outer frame of each parsha. Some people have found, this is all piecework. In other words, if I spent 4 hours in writing mezuzah, I don't get paid for 4 hours of work. Whatever the quality is, it is. So I can write the same thing faster. It's piecework. You get paid for the piece. So someone came up with an idea of whitewashing the parchment. The natural parchment, even if it's finished very well, some areas are a bit fibrous. Problem being, when you run the ink on it, you got to restroke and restroke to have solid lines. Some areas are very oily. That's the animal. It's the skin. It's not Abitibi paper. You put in the same ingredients, you get the same cholent every week, right? So over there, you have to control it that you don't just skate right off the parchment when you're writing. So someone came up with an idea. If we coat the writing side of the parchment with a whitewash, how does it stay there? You mix some sort of a chalk type of thing with glue and you smear it over, then you have a certain amount of friction, you can control it, and the fibers are down under and it moves faster. It actually makes it easier for proofreading too, because of the stark contrast between the very white whitewash. Problem being, number one, you have a barrier between the actual parchment and your ink. Chasam Sofer, a foremost, if not in his generation, the foremost halachic authority, says it's not kosher because you don't have the ink on the parchment. La halacha, because of other halachic authorities, we kosher it. But physically, your ink is sitting on a barrier. A little bit of moisture, the folding, the bending, the ink cracks off. Sometimes loads of it come off. It makes no difference. Once a little bit of it is off, the scripture is no longer kosher. So, there's a word for it in Hebrew, mashuach, which just means it's smeared over. So if I can borrow a term, there are still outlets that sell it. It's less frequent because we have more knowledgeable consumers now. But if I can borrow a term, we don't want mashuach now. We don't want whitewashed. Now, I'm in the Galziana from the Haim, or Fleisher, so mashuach will be pronounced a little different, but we'll leave it at that. But it's just a good catchphrase to remember this. You can ask. You might not be knowledgeable enough to know. This is one thing. Frequency of checking. It's a clear halacha in Shulchan Aruch, Yoredeya 291, paragraph 1 or siman 1, whatever you want to call it, halacha 1, that says mezuzah should be checked twice in 7 years. We're good at math. Why does it say once in 3.5 years? So some say that the Shulchan Aruch is trying to tell you, no, it doesn't have to be exactly then. You know the fellow who pulled off at the side on 401, old man, the hood of the car is up. So an OPP comes by and stops him. The 18-wheelers are shooting by. He broke down. Can I help you? I'm just fine. Why'd you stop? What do you mean? 5,000 kilometers, I need an oil change. You know, abyssal seichel. So 3.5 years since last week, I got to check this on Shabbos. Tragedy. That's one explanation. It doesn't have to be exact. But simply put, it's because the Shulchan Aruch just mentions complete integers instead of fractions. But the intention is pretty close to this. Don't check it at 6.5 years and 6 months later. That's not the intention. There are two concerns that Rashi mentions. One is...
If you do that, are you checking?
You're not doing what Shulchan Aruch wants.
No.
The intention, let's put it this way, the intention is to maintain them and see two things Rashi says on the Gemara. One is it still there? Things happen. Your Filipino cleaning lady, you know.
Too good.
Yeah, she might like it. Number two, maybe it deteriorated. Today in our homes with climate control and so on, heating, cooling, it's better, but halacha doesn't change. Someone told me, I feel I have to check the mezuzot more often outside my home. They're open to the elements. Logically it's so. Halachically it's not so. Do not use a mezuzah casing outside your home that has a back plate. There's room in there for seepage of the weather conditions. Maybe if you're on a bead of, what's that stuff called? Silicone on it, it's better. Do not use outside your home a transparent case unless you have an extreme overhang. Sun will hit it. We know over here we have like 10 months winter and 2 months not winter. But even that short not winter is enough for the parchments to be burned from the heat. Trust me. I've checked close to 100,000 mezuzahs. Close to it. But who's counting? And I also haven't done it in one day. Not transparent and not ones with a back plate. The best ones I find are ones that are a metal tube with a bolt. And even with this you need chesed elyon. Because there's also, the inside is not a vacuum. So you literally have atmosphere in there which has moisture, condensation, it gets warm, it gets cold. And sometimes at the bottom, if it's well sealed, there will be some dampness and I'll notice it, but it usually does not render it invalid.
What about the metal with the screw on top? They're metal, all metal, no opening?
It's better with a screw on. Turn the case upside down, but put the mezuzah in correctly.
Yeah.
Because it gets more hit on top than on the bottom. Maybe if you're in New Orleans, you're better off up top, because as the water rises and hits the case from below, it's less of a... Okay, you can figure that out on your own. Depends where you live. Theoretically, you can do this on your own. Do it yourself. But you know the forms of the letters. Here and there, I didn't bring it with me. I thought to bring it, but I didn't. There are misspellings. The Sofer catches it better than you will. Oh, don't tell me that. If I start off with the word Shema and I see a gimel at the beginning, I'll catch it. Very good. But how about the word Mezuzos? One time with a vav, one time without a vav. L'totofos, one time with a vav, one time without it. That's funny. V'yitzarecha doesn't have a second yud. It's not supposed to. And so on. Leave it for the expert. Right? You paint your own home, but this you leave for the expert. You don't paint your own home either, for a reason. Also, it's very common that you have to re-ink things like very fine strokes on the top of certain letters. They put this up here, I might as well use it. There are 9 letters, that have, I'll just take a simple one, a Zion. They don't come out hollow. They're solid black, but you're intelligent. This is supposed to appear. It does not invalidate it if it's lacking, but if it's lacking everywhere, you have a new issue. What type of Sofer wrote this? Arabs know Hebrew too. So does a professor in Waterloo who teaches Hebrew studies and is not even Jewish, So he makes more per hour teaching there than doing this. But it's supposed to have these, and they're very fine, and they go with time. They just, should we call it attrition? But it fades, they wear out, they crack. It has to be re-inked. That's not a job for you to do it at home. But theoretically, it could be done. The importance of doing this you can get into a little bit in the hashkafa outlook of it. Abarbanel and others do this also. There's some of it in the Rambam. He says you have a physical reminder when you come into your home of God's presence. You know, in the street, you don't act like a chaya raw. You don't act like an animal in the street, right? Your reputation, so on. You still have kids to marry. I'll tell you, worried about our grandchildren too. Jewish people are very funny. But in the street, you act like a mensch. You come into your home, you take off your frock and your hat, you might be taking off a few layers of behavior too. So you have a mezuzah there. That Barbanel says also that it's an awareness of Hashem. We don't, one of your Gimel Ikrim is, in no way should we, anthropomorphic, is that the word? Huh? Take Hashem and turn him into any ideology of something physical. But the Barbanel says it's a reminder. That's kosher. It's a reminder, something physical in the home. And it's not just, oh, you know what, I'll write the Parsha, Bereshis Bara Elokim Hashemayim. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. What it contains, the message that's in there. The Rambam says, when you pass the mezuzah, you're supposed to think what the message of the words. And among other things, it says, you realize this world is fleeting by. And he adds on, nothing lasts forever. I said the best way of remembering that is the mezuzah doesn't last forever. You got to have it checked. Stories. Oh, we got this problem in my family, this problem, this issue, this social issue. Please check the mezuzah. If you see anything slightly wrong, give me a report back. It says these things somewhat in Poiskin. None other than the Beis Yosef, who wrote our Shulchan Aruch, writes that there was a plague in his city, and it was a midbuk. You catch it one from another. Contagious. Excuse me, English is not my first language. Not even my second either. But I'm learning it slowly. It's contagious, and the homes that had kosher mezuzahs skipped over them. The homes weren't quarantined either. This is what he says. He says, with our eyes we saw l'mala min hateva. You could read too much into it. I've had situations, and I'm sure other people who are baidik, mezuzos, and tefillin, they have an issue, give them mezuzos and tefillin and to check. Fine. They were all kosher. Oh, I'm so disappointed. I wanted a quick fix. Number one, that's not what an Erlich Yid should feel. You want them to be kosher. You want to have done the mitzvah correctly. But there's a second thing here, which is it's a plague. The plague is that we want to feel we are good kosher Yidden, we are doing what's right, but not by working on ourselves. Fix my tefillin. Let me get some component of the tefillin that's more mahudar, that's upgraded, and so on. And check everything outside of your body. I'm going to tell you a personal story now that I was part of it. There was a man in our shchuna of Toronto whose wife unfortunately had the dreaded disease. Young woman, large family, and she died of it. He brought me his mezuzos to check. They were fine. He came back 6 months later. She was going downhill. To check them again. I said, I don't want to check them. I just checked them 6 months ago. So he says, please. Okay. A few months later, he came again. And I said, I'm not going to check them. He says, you know what's going on in our family. I'm begging you to check them. So I said, let's make a deal. You go to Rabbi Shlomo Miller, Shlita, and tell him your situation. Tell him how often you've had them checked. If he says check them again, I'll check him, and I'll apologize for giving you a hard time. I'll throw that in also. It's hard to believe, but I went to Rabbi Miller with a shaila right when he walked in. Now, I was ahead of him in line, but him with the household, with his nebuch, this critically old man, I just said, go ahead. He smiled at me, because right then he asked that shaila. And I happened to be there. That was the hashkocha aliyayna. Rabbi Miller said more or less these words. He said, you've checked your mezuzos in the last year twice. It's time to start checking yourself. There, by animals that you slaughter, you check for kashrus, for blemishes. There's a concept called bedikas pnim, bedikas chutz. Those are all external things. The Shulchan Aruch says to do them, but it's not an excuse for not doing a bedikas pnim. People get carried away with everything is in the mezuzah, everything is in the tefillin. No, it's not. You got an issue? How are you doing? How are you and Chofetz Chaim getting along? Are you the best of buddies? And there's 613 mitzvahs with their sub details. So it could be carried too far. There's got to be a balance. There really has to be a balance. When it comes to checking tefillin, the Shulchan Aruch is ambiguous. Shulchan Aruch ambiguous. Apokorsis. Calm down. It is apokorsis. But in Hilchos Tefillin, he says you do not have to check it unless you have a concern. One concern is if it fell on fire, water, you start seeing misshape of the batim, or you don't wear them regularly. What's not regular? There's one opinion, if you don't wear it from morning till night like they used to. Look in Shulchan Aruch where it says if you're a sabal, you carry packages, and people carry them on their heads. What do you do with your tefillin on your head? Because people wore tefillin all day in the good old days. So some say, there's an opinion, we're not wearing them regularly. But we don't hold like that. You wear them regularly even if you own two pairs. That concept is, the more you use them, the safer it is. It's like a muffler. It's the one component in the car. The more you drive, the longer it lasts. It's the one only component in the car. Because air, it seems air is good for the parshas, otherwise there's mold. Today we have less of that, to be honest with you, because of all the conveniences we have in our home for climate control. And then, in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, he says, people give in their tefillin during Elul. It creates an awareness that isn't good for the Sofer. I had a person who said to me, you got to check my tefillin right away. The Rebbe said. So I said, what did the Rebbe say? Tzvi Fleisher should check your tefillin, or you should have them checked. How well can I check if I work 15 hours a day on checking with high concentration? And yet in Shulchan Aruch it says the concept of checking tefillin. The minhag of many is do it once in 7 years. There's a downside to it, besides the cost. Extracting the shell roche, I'm not going into the minutiae of it, stresses the parchment. Stresses the parchment. It's done, but if someone has a directive from a spiritual leader to do it more often, so shall it be. You gotta listen to your spiritual leader. The Talmud deals with this and has 4 opinions. Annually, twice in 7 years, which is the amount of mezuzah, once in 7 years, or you don't have to check them at all. Shulchan Aruch seems to go with the most lenient opinion. But there are those who follow their mentor, who even says once a year. I asked a Talmud Chacham in that group of people, I said, why? So he said the idea is it makes you have an awareness to be medactic in mitzvahs. Have you heard that? I heard this from Rabbi Gansberg. Tefillin have 4 parchments, It's one roll on a shel yad. In the shel rosh, you got 4 separate compartments. Then it's got to be 4 slips of parchment. They're wrapped in parchment. Outside of that, they're wrapped in calf's hair. And there are a lot of details to it. It's stitched closed with something called giddon. It's I got it here somewhere. It is an animal fiber from muscles that are spun together finely. This is not as good as nylon. It's very short, and they're like twisted together and somehow glued together with a chemical called saliva, and it's lumpy. It's hard to work with, but that's the halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Same thing, you must use this for Sefer Torah. And this, so many details, but you need squareness in the stitching. There are 12 holes. Halacha doesn't require it must have 12 holes. It must be square on the bottom. L'chumra, it must be square on top. You need squareness of the cube. The 4 sections of a shel rosh need not be even. It's a hidur. It's an enhancement. But the outer dimensions must be sufficiently square. Nothing is perfect. My Kabbalah from my poskim, Rabbi Kamenetsky Zatzal, and a friend of mine who's a Sofer heard it from Rav Moshe Feinstein, 2% accuracy. It's based on a Tosus and Erev and Daf Zayin, 2% ratio of inaccuracy. The script in Tefilin, you don't have the opportunity to have a mezuzah this big. The larger they are, the broader the stroke, and in general, the longer they will last. In Tefillin, you can't have gargantuous Tefillin because there's a limitation on the body where they may rest. Some have larger, some have smaller, and when you get into this size, you're going to run into problems because it's wire thin, and the thinner they are, there's more room for inaccuracy in writing. It's a fact. It's harder to differentiate between a Dalet and a Zayin. Spacing is tighter. It's microsurgery. Last but not least, to maintain them, and you have a person who checks if he has to make any sort of adjustments. He can destroy them, and it must be fixed. Keep away from something very small if you can. And the writing doesn't last as long. The cheapest ones are multi-piece glued together. By definition, tefillin have to be unibody, but the glue halachically makes it one. Compare the thickness of this with the thickness here. You put them on your head, you sweat, salt, water, they can start warping, which is going to last longer. The head component, I spend more time on it because it's more detailed. Here, there are the true divisions all the way down to the base. This keeps, I say this keeps it shaped better. It does. It keeps it shaped better. The ones that are thin like this, they separate. This is made of many pieces. There's a strip, a strip, a strip, a strip. An accordion is put on the inside with flanges. They come apart easily. The good news is it's external. You see it, you know you got a problem. So if you care to do something about it, use them. The straps, they don't make them as well as they used to. No, it need not be this wide. This is for disciplining the kids. They take a big oval. Again, it has to be tanned with Shem Kedushas for the sanctity of. And somehow they just pull it like it's the Jewish pasta machine. Some want a little wider, a little narrower. The minimum width requirement, according to the Chazon Ish, is 11 millimeters, B'diavad 10, Rabbi Avram Chaim Noah 10 and 9. Well, let's get new tires that are bald. Very good idea to do that for your car. You want to start off with an 11 millimeter wide strap for your tefillin. You use them a little, you pull them, and they get too narrow. What's the standard in the industry is 15. Now, someone who had 18, he didn't get them from me. He just one day said, please put them into Geniza for me. They have sanctity. They don't just stay on my body properly. I guess if you're 7 feet tall, he wouldn't have had a problem. They stretch with usage. You got to keep your eyes on them. They can lose their paint. They don't make them as well as they used to. They stretch faster. We sometimes have problems with bad batches of hides which don't retain the paint well. You know, there's an expression, Tzadik Yafrit Tzitzios of Tomid, which spells out tzitzis. Tzadik Yashchir Ritzuos of Tomid. It's good to have that little bottle. Whenever you use it, sparingly, and you must first verbalize L'Shem Kedushas Tefilin. There are different minhagim, winding out, winding in, endless amount around the fingers. It's all good. I said a vitz, a joke. I said, if there was a third direction to go, someone would be doing it. There are different minhagim by the ksharim. It makes sense to replicate your parents. I, among others, follow the general Polish Hasidic custom. And I don't really know what my father's custom is. He did it that way, but he doesn't really know if his father did it that way because of the war. And there's a lot of mishachts. Today, what people do in their Baruch Hashem, a lot of Bali Tshuva, whichever society they're in, they copy it. It's not the end of the world if you don't copy exactly what was done, because it's all acceptable. This also gives you a bit of an idea. There's a cutaway. The work that's done on this leather, that's one piece, to turn it into tefillin. When I lectured once in Detroit years ago, a young man named Larry Lax, he made the leather component for the contact point between prosthesis and the severed limb, the limb of the body. That needs precision, adjustment. And he came and saw it was my slide film show. He says, my work is Mickey Mouse compared to making a pair of oxhide tefillin. Okay, I left. I guess we can go over time. 2 minutes for questions, because I thought I did such a good job. What's there to ask? Rabbi Mendel, my good friend. Yes?
What's your opinion of getting tefillin and mezuzos computer checked?
Computer checked? I think it's a wonderful thing. Hashem runs the world. He allowed for the development of technology to come in place now. They say, I don't know this for a fact, Sefer Torah, which have 304, 805 letters in it, 3 and 4,000, there was seldom a mistake in the old days. People knew how to concentrate. Today, even if a guy takes it very seriously, he's not listening to that Jewish rock and roll in the background. We don't know how to concentrate the way they used to. There are very few Rabbi Kivagers around. It's not just the rush, it's the yeshiva, sitting there in one place and concentrating on what you're doing, and they're making more mistakes. I think it's an absolute, for Sefer Torah for sure, to say, oh, this wasn't computer checked, we shouldn't have laid the Spitzibor, this is going overboard. You gotta have a balance. There was a shul where there was a fight, literally a fight between two guys for Parshas Zohar. No, use a nicer one. No, it wasn't computer check. Everything with a balance, but it's the most wonderful thing for accuracy in text. It doesn't tell you if letters are touching, and so on. Yes?
The Rav mentioned earlier that parchments have to be l'shem mitzvah.
Yeah.
I remember reading the news in Eretz Yisrael that they found a large shipment of parchment coming in from Gaza once. And so we rely on the Sofer.
That's all right. The Yidden were living in Gaza. They were making cloth there.
It was before. It was after.
It was post.
So we have Erlich Sofrin. We know who they are. We can rely on Rabbanim who can tell us who they are. Who's controlling The Sofer isn't controlling that far back.
Or
or
them
his- or-
we got to stop now. All they're losing now is breakfast.
Yeah, everybody's invited to breakfast now.
Yeah,
the Sofer-
go now.
how
the
far back-
Rabbanim try to stand on top of it, and the Yerushalmi Rabbanim are pretty sharp. And you got to pray for Siyata D'Shmaya. I don't know. The Shal Rosh has to have halachic proper divisions. I get closed. Thank you.
Right.